Alright, first off, let me clear something up. The story's called Beyond Her Time, and if you recognize, you won't recognize it, but it sounds familiar. I kind of based this story off Wooden Toaster and Mike the Microphone's song Beyond Her Tomb. So, in saying that, let's get started. Beyond Her Time by Greenleaf. I was looking through the library for something to read. I must admit that Equestria has quite a lot of history. I kept looking and my eyes stopped on a faded black book that was wedged in between two other books. I pulled the book out with my magic and found the cover covered in dust. I blew it off and its title showed, which read, Beyond Her Garden. I looked back at Twilight and asked, "Hey Twi, what's this book here about?" Twilight, who was on the opposite side of the library, came over and looked at the old tome. She then said, "I don't know. I've never read it. In fact, I don't remember it being with my books when I came from Canterlot. Some pony must have put it there before I moved in." "Why don't we read it?" I asked. Twilight agreed, and we sat down and opened the book. Beyond Her Garden, an autobiography by Carrot Top. A long, long time ago, back when Ponyville was still a small village getting its roots, there lived on the outskirts of the village a simple mayor living simple dreams, to plant a garden so beautiful that every pony would stare in awe at it and beg to have one morsel of food from it. But alas, these were dark times, and for a reason that no pony could figure out, the soil in Ponyville was infertile. Not even the unicorns with their magic could render the ground usable, and it baffled every pony. Every pony except the one who had the dream of planting a beautiful garden, for that's what she was doing. Unfortunately, instead of being showered with praise, she was shown hate and called a witch. That is, till one pony decided to speak up for her. This is Carrot Top's point of view. "Witch!" a brown stallion had called. "Hag!" came from a black stallion. "Get out of our town!" a white mare yelled. It was another week of insults and hating as some pony found out I was gardening again. Last week I was able to make them go away, but that may have just been a conveniently timed earthquake when I stomped my hoof down. This week it was a bit harder getting them to leave, as I doubt another earthquake would come rolling through. As I stood there and took the names, some pony decided to go the extra mile and threw a rock at me. Hit me square in between my eyes and caused an open wound which started bleeding. I just stood there till they bored themselves and went away. But then, the most extraordinary thing happened. A colt ran out from the crowd and stopped in front of me, facing the crowd. He then said with anger in his tone, "Now y'all stop that, you hear? She ain't done nothing wrong. All she did was figure out how to grow something in this dust ball of a town. In fact, we should be praising her that she can do this, not calling her a witch and throwing stuff at her." A blue colt then yelled, "Step aside, old man. We're here for the mare, not you." The colt that had defended me replied, "I'll tell you once, sonny, I'm not moving." There were murmurs among the crowd. Then one pony said, "Come on, every pony, let's go. We've wasted enough time here." The crowd dispersed, and the colt that had defended me turned around and asked, "You all right?" I picked my head up and got a better look at him. His coat was brown, and he had a dark red mane and tail. His eyes were yellow, and his cutie mark was an orange leaf. He also wore a leather pony hat and vest. I stumbled over my words to try and reply, but finally got out a "Thank you." "No problem," the colt replied. "Just couldn't stand seeing that kind of injustice done. I drew the line when the rock was thrown." I looked down again and gave a smile. "Yeah." Colton said, "That reminds me." I picked my head back up and the colt reached into one of the pockets on his vest and pulled out a handkerchief, which he gave to me. "You might want to clean that before it gets infected," he said. I took the handkerchief and placed it to the spot where the rock had hit me. I then asked the colt, "So, what's your name?" The colt smiled and said, "My name is Jebediah Autumn Leaf." Switching back to Greenleaf's point of view. I stopped reading the book and my eyes became wide after I had read Jebediah Autumn Leaf. Twilight had noticed my expression and asked, "Possible relative of yours?" I shook my head out of my shocked state and replied, I don't know. I mean, I did have a great-great-grandfather named Jebediah, but he lived on Earth, not Equestria. Twilight then said, maybe if we read more of that, or the book, it'll tell us if this Jebediah pony had any relation to you. I agreed, and we continued reading the book. Switching back to Carrot Top's point of view. I smiled and said, thank you, Jebediah, for your help. Then, an unfortunate fact hit me, and I looked back down towards the ground and frowned. But alas, your efforts have been in vain, as they'll most likely be back tomorrow. I sighed. Jebediah then said, what if I told you that I've been adventuring all around Equestria, and I only came back here 'cause I ain't got nowhere else to go? I looked up at him and asked, what are you asking? Jebediah dropped his head down to mine and said, I'm asking if you'd like a sort of protector to keep away all these ponies that they're hazing you. I just hugged him and hoped he'd take it for a yes. I then said in a quiet voice, thank you. To which Jebediah replied, it's what I do, darling. It's what I do. I pause. I stopped reading again and said, I knew it. Jebediah has to be related to me. Heroism runs through most of my family. Twilight said, calm down. We still don't know that yet. He could just be a regular heroic pony who stands up for the innocent. My excitement had slightly dwindled, but we went back to the book anyway. Back to Carrot Top's point of view. So for 6 months, Jebediah guarded me from any pony who might cause me harm or put me down. And during that time, he told me the story of his adventures. Turns out Jebediah wasn't originally from Equestria. He instead came from a place called Earth, which he said was populated by what he described as hairless monkeys wearing clothes. I found his description quite silly, but he told me that that was the only way he could describe what lived there. He did also mention that there were animals on Earth, but said that they didn't talk. Over on Earth, though, Jebediah said that he was also an adventurer, but he had explored everything and unfortunately had contracted a number of diseases. None were lethal, but they had taken a toll on his health, and he was confined to a hospital. He then told me that as he was lying in his bed, he witnessed a bright flash of light in his room, and then in front of him stood Princess Celestia. The princess said that she had seen Jebediah's heroism and bravery, and offered if Jebediah would like to go on one more adventure. He agreed, and Princess Celestia teleported him to Equestria. In doing that, it gave him a few years back, and he had a few adventures in Equestria, till he came back to Ponyville and met me. Switching back again to Greenleaf's point of view. I pulled away from the book again, but before I could say anything, Twilight said, before you say anything, but I told her, he is related. There's a story in my family that my great-great-grandfather, Jebediah, was an adventurer, and that he did get sick from adventuring. And the story was told to me when I was young. I was told that my great-great-grandfather went peacefully. But when I asked for the story again when I was older, I was told that in his final hours that Celestia did show up, and she did commemorate him. And she did take him with her. Then she did take him with her. That's how he ended up in Equestria. Twilight then said, so he is related. I then said, but Twilight, do you know what this means? What does it mean? Twilight asked. It means that I'm not the first in my family to discover another universe, I replied. I thought about this, and said, but I am the first to come back and tell about it. Twilight then asked, shall we continue reading? Once again, we went back to the book. Switching back to Carrot Tops. I asked Jebediah if it would be alright if he went to the market to pick me up some more seeds. He was a little reluctant at first. You sure you're gonna be alright, darling? He asked. I'll be fine, I replied, but we won't make it long if I run out of seeds. He did go, so I continued gardening for a bit, and pulled up some of the stuff that had already sprouted, which I decided to make into a salad for the both of us. It was only a few minutes after Jebediah had left when a banging came at the door. I was walking towards it when I asked, did you forget something, Jebediah? I was given no response, so maybe he couldn't hear me. I opened the door, and instead of it being Jebediah, it was the 3 ponies that had called me names on the day that Jebediah stood up for me. The brown and black earth ponies, and the blue colt. who I could now see was a unicorn. They all smiled evilly at me, and the brown colt asked, "So where's your bodyguard, witch?" I turned around to run, but instead the blue unicorn picked me up with his magic. The brown colt, who had pulled some rope out of his saddlebag, proceeded to tie me up. The trio then took me upstairs and threw me into the spare room of my house, which only had a large window in it. The blue unicorn then floated in 2 barrels of hay, then got close to me and said, "We're gonna watch you burn." Using his magic, he lit the bales on fire. The 3 ponies then slammed the door, and I could hear them laugh and leave the house. So I lay there, the heat becoming unbearable, the smoke starting to choke me. When not even a minute later, I heard the front door smash open, then hooves run up the stairs, and I saw Jebediah bust into the spare room. He ran and picked me up with his teeth and flung me onto his back. He then said, "Hang on," and charged towards the window. I closed my eyes and hoped he had wings, because in the next moment he jumped through a closed window. And only a few seconds after that I heard him hit something, and opened my eyes to see an orange-colored glowing platform underneath us. The platform lowered, and I was levitated off Jebediah's back by a similar glow, and placed in front of him. He then proceeded to untie me, after which I flung my hooves around him, hugged him tight, and began to cry. He put a hoof on my back and said in a soft tone, "It's all right, darling. I'm here. It's almost over." I then stopped embracing him for a moment, sniffed, and then asked, "What do you mean it's not over?" Jebediah then said, "I've got to get you out of here." I then asked, "But where would we go?" I asked. "We can't head to Canterlot, because all the ponies in town will be on the lookout for us. And we can't head out of town because we've got no supplies." "I don't mean a place, I mean a time. I plan to send you into the future," he replied. "But how?" I asked. Jebediah then removed his hat, and in the middle of his dark red mane was a horn. "You're a unicorn?" I asked shakingly. "Yep," he replied. "How do you think I saved both our hides?" I kept staring at his horn, and he continued to say, "Over the 6 months that I've stayed with you, Carrot Top, I've been studying my magic, and learned of a time travel spell that will get you to the future." I then asked, "But why?" Jebediah replied, "You can't stay here. I don't want what happened just a few moments ago to happen again." "But what about my house and my garden?" I asked. "You can get a new house and plant a new garden once you get to the future," he replied. I gave a heavy sigh and said, "Okay, let's do it." Jebediah closed his eyes, and his horn began to glow. Then, in the next moment, a white light surrounded us, and I landed on the ground, eyes closed. I opened my eyes and noticed that we were still in the same spot, but noticed 3 things. My garden was overgrown, I could no longer smell my house burning, and Jebediah had disappeared from in front of me. "Jebediah," I called, "where are you?" I then heard a groan next to me say, "I'm right here, darling." The voice sounded much older, but was still Jebediah's. I looked over and saw him, but his looks had changed. His mane was now gray, his eyes were sunken in, and he had wrinkles on various parts of his body. "Jebediah, what happened?" I asked. "In order for the spell to work, one must provide some age to keep the other young. I guess getting here took more age out of me than I thought," he replied. I picked up his head, and he smiled and said, "I've had a good life. My final adventure is over, but yours is just beginning, Carrot Top." Tears started welling up in my eyes, and I asked, "What are you saying?" Then, with his final breath, he said, "Go. Become the star that I know you are." He then closed his eyes, exhaled, and I knew he was gone. I cried again, for the greatest pony I had ever met was gone. I had him buried in Old Horse Cemetery and built a house behind Sweet Apple Acres. I wrote this book so that if any of Jebediah's kin ever came here and found this book, that they would learn of how great he was. Back to Greenleaf's point of view. I closed the book and looked at Twilight, who returned my gaze. I then said, Looks like we'd better go pay a visit to the last pony who saw my great-great-grandfather alive. Twilight agreed. I put my saddlebag on, stuck the book in the pouch, and we headed out of the library and off towards Sweet Apple Acres. We got out there, greeted the Apple family, and asked if we could see Carrot Top. They pointed us towards a house on a hill that was behind the farm that had a giant carrot on the roof. We got to the front door and I knocked. Inside, a female voice said, "Come in." I opened the door and inside the small house stood a yellow mare with an orange-amber mane. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. I pulled the book out of my bag with my magic and showed it to Carrot Top. She looked at the book for a few seconds, then smiled, and I said, "My name is Greenleaf. I'm Jebediah's great-great-grandson." Carrot Top said, "He was a great colt, your great-great-grandfather. Saved my life and kept the other villagers that wanted to cause me harm away." "How long ago was this book written?" I asked. "It was pretty dusty when I found it." 5 years ago, Carrot Top replied. "That's when I came to this time. Wrote the book about a week later and decided to put it in the library so that, well, you've read the book." Carrot Top then invited us in, and to my right, on the wall opposite of where Carrot Top was sitting, hung a leather hat and jacket. Carrot Top said, "That was your great-great-grandfather's." I continued to stare at the items in awe. Then Carrot Top asked, "Would you like it?" I turned around with a smile on my face and said, "It may have been my great-great-grandfather's, but I think it has more meaning with you." Carrot Top smiled, then asked, "Would you like to go see him? His grave, I mean." We agreed, and Carrot Top led us to Old Horse Cemetery, which was located on the outskirts of town. Once we got there, Carrot Top led us to Jebediah's grave, which read, "Jebediah Autumn Leaf, adventurer, hero, friend." Carrot Top put a carrot on top of Jebediah's grave, and I said, "Hi, great-great-grandpa. I'm Greenleaf, your great-great-grandson. I came by because I read a book about how you saved some pony and brought him to my time. Guess I just wanted to say thanks and that I'm going to uphold the family tradition of heroism." I turned around and the two mares behind me were smiling. I looked at Carrot Top and said, "Thank you for writing your story." Carrot Top replied, "No, thank you for reading it." We all left the graveyard and headed back towards our houses. I decided to hold on to the book to show my kids in the future who my great-great-grandfather was, and hope that the book would be passed down through the generations to come. End. Now, let me just quick classify one thing. I never said it in the story, but Jebediah's hat was over his horn in the beginning. Just never said that. Oh, and well, one other thing. I actually don't think I have a great-great-grandfather named Jebediah. I'm fairly sure I don't. Alright, thanks for listening.